Earlier this year, I had the chance to sit down with Jason Summers of Landcastle Title Group. He's had a long and distinguished career in title, from working on the agency side and the direct side of operations for underwriters. We discussed everything from the concern over a potential recession in 2020 to wire fraud and growing a title operation with a variable cost model. I'm Amanda Farrell, and this is Title Talks. Thank you for joining us. Do you want to go ahead and start and just say a little bit about your name and your experience in title and real estate?
Sure. My name is Jason Summers. I've been with Fidelity since 2005. Prior to that, I was with another national underwriter, but I've been in title pretty much my whole life. My father has an agency. He started in the title business in 1968 in Michigan, and that's what brought us to Florida, believe it or not. And so yeah, I've always been around it, primarily on the agency side of the business, starting way back out of college, and then transitioning into the direct side of the business in late 2015. So I've been with Fidelity on the direct side for a handful of years now.
Great, awesome. And can you tell me a little bit about the current state of the housing market in Florida? How does that compare to the national state of things?
Sure. So Florida is always a little bit unique in that we have everything that most people want, right? We have sun and sand and great weather, positive population growth. You know, on average, we're probably netting 1,000 new individuals to Florida every day. So that bodes really well for our economy. Obviously, we have tourism, which helps out tremendously. No state income tax, so it drives a lot of people here as well. So, you know, overall, Florida, I tend to say, is a little more insulated than the rest of the U.S. But obviously, we have our pockets where maybe we're seeing a little bit of a slowdown on the real estate side of things. But on the, conversely to that, we're also seeing a tremendous growth in other markets as well.
You said that you started off in the independent title agency side of things.
I did.
What sort of advice would you give to smaller title companies that are trying to compete in the current market right now?
Sure. So I think my biggest advice, and probably the biggest thing I've learned transitioning from the agency side of the business to the direct side of the business, is that you need to really look at your metrics. And when I say metrics, I mean your average fee per file, the number of transactions that you're taking in every day for new orders, the number of transactions you're closing as well on a daily basis, and obviously looking at that on an overall perspective of how your month plays out. But the reason those are very important is that sometimes we feel really, really busy because Friday rolls around, we got a lot of closings, and it feels great, right? We're bringing in a lot of money. But what's happening on the back end? Are we draining the pond? Are we kind of draining our pipe? Or do we have enough orders coming in to meet that same demand or to create that same sort of buzz that we have every Friday going for the next 30, 60, 90 days? Right. So my biggest piece of advice is make sure you understand your clients, your business. You don't want to live paycheck to paycheck, meaning your closing ratios. If we look at the number of files that we bring in compared to what we close that month, if it's a very high ratio, I jokingly tell our offices you're living paycheck to paycheck because you got to bring in now that same number of orders the following month to kind of generate the same revenue. So believe it or not, over the 20-year period of the title business, at least in the Fidelity world, we average about 72% of the orders that are open are closed, so 72% closing ratio. So when that starts to creep up, we want to be a little more concerned, and we kind of can tell at that point the market's slowing down. The number of orders coming in are starting to outpace the number of orders that we're physically closing. And so just be mindful of that. You can adjust. The only thing we can do is adjust and manage to the market. We can't control the market. So that's my biggest takeaway, I think, for what I've learned on the agency or the direct side of the business.
So on that note, knowing how to adjust to the market as things are coming and going, I know people talk a lot about, related to what we do, using prop logics for ancillary closing tasks. Would you say that makes sense for a lot of title companies?
Absolutely.
Like a more scalable model? So when does it make sense to hire new talent to be in your office doing those closing tasks versus maybe partnering with someone that can do those tasks for you?
Absolutely. I think it's imperative that you do use outside vendors, especially if we're going into a market that's going to be maybe a little bit slower. And historically, the business in general has a seasonality to it. So we always kind of start a little slow, and then second quarter, third quarter kind of gets a little more busy, and we peak, and then we kind of have this downward trend going into the fourth quarter, with the holidays and things of that nature. So kind of a normal bell curve every single year. And the reason I bring that up is on our end, we like to stay very consistent with our employee counts, right? We don't want to have to run out and hire and train, and then, unfortunately maybe have to make a reduction as the market kind of falls away from us. So what we like to do is tap into outside vendors. That way we can keep our employee counts pretty normal and manage our workflows by using outside resources that aren't necessarily a fixed expense to the operation, meaning we're only paying for what we're ordering. So when we use companies like PropLogix, if we get 100 orders a month, great. If we have 20 orders a month, it doesn't really affect us as much because we're only paying for paying the fees for the services that we've ordered on those 20 files. Whereas if I had a full-time employee, it may get a little more difficult conversation, going from 100 orders a month to 20. We're very mindful of the ratio between fixed costs and variable costs. So allowing us to utilize a company like PropLogix allows us to have more of a variable cost every month and keep our fixed costs very manageable. Something that, again, going back to the budgeting question, something we know will be repeatable. And then regardless of an influx of orders or a rapid decrease of orders, the overall impact on expenses are minimized because we're using an outside provider like PropLogix.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. There's also been a lot of talk of, when we talk about ebb and flow, a lot of talk of the recession coming up. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think it's mostly just talk? Is it like trying to be a self-fulfilling prophecy? Right. What can you speak to that and maybe give advice to people who are worried?
Sure. So personally, I'm always a half full type of person. So regardless of what I hear or read in the, hear in the news or read in the press, I try to look past it. I try to look at how does it affect my world and what are we seeing in our markets and what are our clients seeing, our realtors, our lenders, individuals purchasing. So one thing I will say is, coming into the year, there was a lot of talk about a slowdown, increasing interest rates, things that would have an impact on the overall economy within Florida and the U.S. for that matter. But like I said earlier, Florida has a lot of things that insulate us. We have some positive population growth here in the state, historical low unemployment I think it's at 3.9%. So all those things come into play, and we've actually seen an increase in certain markets, although certain markets that we operate in are down, so maybe 2% over last year. And I've seen some new projections, even as of last Friday, that pretty much have said 2019 is going to be flat. So we'll take flat. I don't necessarily mean, I'm not a fortune teller. I always joke and say my crystal ball's in the shop, but recession, who knows? I mean, like I mentioned to you, we try to look 30, 60, 90 days out. Not sure what the end of the year will bring. But as it appears today, at least from a Florida perspective, everything looks pretty positive.
And do you know much about the Florida builders? Are they keeping up with demand for inventory and the different needs of various home buyers, like millennials? I know they tend to prefer walkability. They'll sacrifice space for location. How do you think Florida is catering to those demands and those different home buyers?
Yeah, so land, they're not making any more of it. So that's always a big challenge for new home builders, finding enough usable land to create the communities they're looking to develop. And so obviously in downtown areas or places that you mentioned are walkable or walkability, that gets drastically complicated. So we're seeing some townhomes and some pocket and boutique communities pop up, but then you kind of run into affordability. That's probably our biggest challenge at the moment is affordability. But you're absolutely right. What we're seeing on our end, our millennials do tend to like newly built homes as opposed to buying homes in the secondary market for exactly the reasons you mentioned. They're looking for something a little more, it's from a containment perspective, they're looking for something a heck of a lot more efficient than maybe the designs of 10, 15 years ago. And they're also looking for, more eco-friendly homes, solar panels, just other, building with alternative materials that maybe the homes that were built in years past didn't take advantage of. So we are definitely seeing some movement on the millennial side of buying, but it tends to go towards newly constructed homes. And then even secondarily, we're seeing where builders are catering to the millennials as well. are building complete communities, to your point of kind of self-contained communities where you have walkability, things of that nature, all geared around the things that millennials are looking for. So I definitely see it expanding in the future. We just, here in Florida, like I said, it gets a little difficult with land, where that land's available, commutes, things of that nature. Right. But there's definitely a big push, and the builders that we deal with are definitely seeing some movement. But again, it's a difficult proposition with the purchase of land and finding the right location.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like where do you feel like millennials, because definitely there's been some surveys I've seen that say millennials are feeling buyer's remorse, and even with the friends that I know in my age range of like 30 to 36 say they kind of wish they hadn't of bought the house they did, or they wish they had done more research. Where do you think the expectations and the reality is not meeting up with each other?
No, absolutely. And I've read very similar articles where they said 60 to 70% of millennial home buyers kind of regret their purchase. And now, granted, we're only one organization, but we have a fair number of millennials that work for us. And two of those individuals, Kelly Cassidy and Aaron Elser, out of the Tampa market, have started a podcast called Millennial Life 360. And they talk about all the various things that affect the millennials from a real estate perspective. And so the reason I mention that is we feel the most important key to helping millennials not regret their purchase, but also jump into the market, is educating them. So, our takeaway on the 60 or 70% of people that say they regret it, we feel like if they were better educated going into the process, they wouldn't have that same regret. And secondarily, I think what you're also seeing is there's a lot of millennials that are getting into the lending side and the real estate side, and even kind of the more seasoned realtors and lenders are taking it upon themselves to really understand what millennials are looking for. And so between some of the things we're doing in the title industry to help educate millennials, as well as the lenders and the realtors also kind of helping educate, I think you'll see those numbers decrease. Mm-hmm. We were all in school, right? So a lot of times when day one, something looks really scary and you say, I'm never going to get through this class. But as you learn and you educate yourself and you understand, the process, the end result would be a very much different experience day one compared to day 30 or 60. And I think you'll find that we'll see more activity for the individuals that have educated themselves and see it as a great investment in their future as far as...
I don't know if you've seen that one video that Ulta did where they were on the streets and they were interviewing people and asking them if they know what title, if they were homeowners first, and if they knew what title insurance was. It was pretty shocking, the amount of people who didn't really totally understand what that was. Do you think that millennials and younger people are more aware of what that is? Do you think there's a way that the title industry in general can do more to sort of educate people on that specific aspect and how important your home, like having a homeowner's policy is?
No, I agree, and it's an age-old question. I always say it's a great hidden industry. It brings tremendous value, obviously, to the homeowners in the way of the protections and the things that we do, to ensure that they are safeguarded in their home. And then obviously from a lender perspective, you're not going to be able to get a loan without them having their coverages as well. So yes, can we do more to educate? Absolutely. We're probably the worst at it, because we're so inundated in what we do every day. But through the podcast and through seminars and some of the things that the local Land Title Association, the FLTA, are doing, some of the things that the National Land Title Association are doing through ALTA, I think we'll bring more awareness to the value that we bring as an industry to the overall consumer, regardless of the generation they fall into. I think it's really key. So yes, can we do a better job? Do I know exactly what can be done to make that happen? Probably not. But it's an effort we're all taking on every single day, and things through the podcast, like the podcast, and some of the things that we have on our website. And I know your company does a great job with educating as well. So it's going to take all of us to jump in and help educate the consumer. But it's an age-old question that I think we all struggle with, and it just takes time. And again, going back to what we talked about with educating the millennials, I would say everyone needs to do that. You need to really understand that stack of papers that you're signing at the end of the day. And I feel like we do, at Landcastle, we do a really good job of making sure that everyone's they get it. They understand what they're signing their name to, and I think that's just important.
How do like referral businesses work? Getting more clients, more realtors in the door, based upon just being able to work with them and sustain those relationships. If the market does flatline, like how do you keep business numbers up if there's less sales, in general?
Yeah, so the one thing that we focus on is our client mix. So we never, you've heard the saying, right? You don't want to have all your eggs in one basket. So same holds true in sales. So we make sure we have a pretty diversified client mix. So we have a great, and obviously every market's different. So sometimes the buyer agent controls where title is sent, and sometimes the selling realtor controls where the title is sent. So we make sure we have a really good mix, and then we also obviously work with a lot of lenders as well. And some of those lenders are more refi based or refinance based. And right now we're actually seeing a pretty large uptick in refinances just because the rates have stabilized and actually dropped in some areas, or in all areas. So the number of homes that are available for refinance has actually increased slightly this year. And we've seen a nice influx of refinance activity because of that. Now, a couple of things happen. With the lower rates, obviously it spurs more sales activity. And so that's going to obviously help our various realtors that we work with around the state. So depending on the price point, those low interest rates could just drive up a tremendous amount of business for our clients. And then in other markets where maybe, say in the South Florida market where homes are drastically more than, say, Tampa or Orlando, it's a different mix, and so those homes tend to move and sell at a different rate than, say, homes in at a $200,000 range compared to $1 million homes. So we just make sure that we have a good spread of clients across all those various mixes of business activity to ensure that regardless of the market conditions, we're still able to maintain a meaningful number of new orders coming in the door.
Would you like to talk a little bit about wire fraud and what sort of things companies can do to combat that?
Yeah, I'd prefer not to, because it's such an issue. Yeah, but you're right. It's something that we've dealt with for far too long. And I'll just give you a really quick story. We went up to Tallahassee a couple weeks back for the Florida Land Title Association lobby days, where we go and speak to the senators and the regulators about various bills that we have that are coming up. And there's not a law that we can necessarily put in place, but maybe we can do a PSA or something along those lines to educate everyone. But it's a really growing issue, and it's something that we monitor from a company standpoint monthly, daily. We put in a lot of different procedures internally to protect our clients. Can't really get into all of those, but I will share with you that it's at the forefront of our mind. I mean, I joke when I say this, but it's very real in that I almost want to tell anyone that's wiring us money or anyone that's involved in a transaction, someone is trying to steal your money. And they're going to be emailing you. And if you get anything that looks suspicious, call us. And call us on a number that you've always had, right? Don't call off the number that's in the email. Call from a known number. So we have a very strict procedure that we follow when we first get the contract, and that we speak to the buyers and the sellers, anyone that's going to be wiring money to us, exactly how that needs to happen. But it's a real big issue, not just in our industry, but with the elderly, with the people that aren't as tech savvy. And it's very sad because we've seen situations where people's whole entire life savings are gone in a split second because they reacted off of a fraudulent wire request. And so we take it very serious. We have a whole task force corporately that helps us deal with it. We have very good relationships with our banking partners to help us kind of stop it if we see it early enough. But what I would tell everyone, again, it goes back to educating themselves on title insurance and understanding what they're getting themselves into. Educate yourself on wire fraud. Don't click on those links in the email. We always say look for punctuation because the fraudsters are horrible at spelling and punctuation. So if something looks off, it probably is. But the really scary part is for the consumer is the fraudsters tend to ghost us. So they'll send emails that look like it came from our email. Their signature line will look identical to us. They'll grab our logos, and the good and the bad of the internet is you can find anything online. So We just had a situation the other day where I supposedly asked one of our offices to wire out a large sum of money, which I would never do. But one internet search away, you can find out who I am, my email address, and which company I work for, and some people will take advantage of that. So I always tell everyone, use your spidey sense. If it just doesn't feel right, ask the question. Taking a couple extra minutes to verify, it's not the end of the world. I know we live in a very busy time, but picking up the phone and calling your closer, your processor, the manager at the title company, your realtor, your lender, just to verify, it will go a long way, and it will hopefully save some heartburn in the future.
I know I've read a lot about these cases, and one of the things that they do is manipulate emotion. So definitely reaching out to home buyers and letting them know if someone is making it seem like something really bad is going to happen if you don't act now. That's a pretty good indication that you might be getting scammed. So always take the time to just slow down and, like you said, just double check, pick up the phone with the no number and call your realtor or your title agent to make sure that they're talking to the right person.
Absolutely. We have purposely removed the realtor from that process. Years ago, 5, 6, 7 years ago, the realtor was always the one that would help kind of move the documents around because that was the known entity to the buyer or the seller. And so what we've done, we tried to change that. We tried to protect the realtor, remove them from any of that, remove them from that situation where they're handling instructions. We want the buyer and the seller to come directly to us. We'll manage that. We'll make sure they have an encrypted way to contact us and receive our wiring information. But one thing that I tell people all the time is our information never changes. So if some way, somewhere along the way, you, the client, the consumer, says, we must wire to this new bank account, chances are it doesn't work that way. Title companies rarely change their banking relationships. And I would just, again, it's another red flag. Use your gut. Something doesn't look right. Make a phone call. The bank accounts, this is where I kind of ding the lenders a little bit. I think there's only 1 or 2 lenders that actually match the name to the account. So for instance, if you were wiring to Landcastle, we would ask you to wire to, Landcastle Title Group. Well, when you go to the bank and say a fraudster gave them a new account number, the bank should be able to tell you who's the owner of that account. If it's Jim Smith or Jane Doe and it's not Landcastle, red flag. So again, just asking some additional questions will go a long way because inevitably when they send you those fraudulent wiring instructions, it will have the name on there to where it's going. And some of these guys have gotten creative. They'll use some variation of our name because again, a real quick internet search will tell you who we are. But again, we don't change that information. We bank at one bank, and most other agencies around the state do the same thing.
Thanks so much to Jason Summers for sharing all his expertise. If you're interested in checking out the Millennials 360 Life, you can find their self-described short but sweet episodes on iTunes. Title Talks is hosted by me, Amanda Farrell, and produced by PropLogix, the title support company that helps title agents close better. Until next time, happy closings.